This episode brought to you by Nomadic Research, built for the wild and forged in adversity. Somewhere between the front lines and the firelight, a vision was born. The founders of Nomadic Research spent years in the harshest environments on Earth, where grit and resilience weren't just words, but a way of life. They saw a need for gear that could handle anything, gear that wasn't just built, but built to last. From battlefields to backcountry trails, every piece of Nomadic Research gear is designed with one mission: unyielding performance for those who refuse to quit. The founders believe in patriotism, personal responsibility, and the freedom of the great outdoors, because adventure isn't just a weekend escape, it's a way of life. Born in the heart of Afghanistan, forged in adversity, and built for the wild, Nomadic Research is gear for those who go further. You can start your adventure at nomadicresearch.com. Hey guys, welcome back to the DTD podcast, Dynamic Tales Delivered. This week in the studio, for 24 years, he carried the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor into the world's darkest corners. A Marine Raider, he led warriors through blood, loss, and sacrifice most can't imagine. This isn't about medals or ranks, it's about the cost. Families torn, brothers lost, and innocence in the crossfire, and the burden every Marine brings home. Today, my guest takes us inside the true price of freedom and the stories that never leave the battlefield. Please welcome into the studio, Ivan Ingraham. What's going on, my friend?
Hey, it's good to see you this evening. Thank you. Doing well.
I'm glad that we finally got this taken care of. We were scheduling back and forth, and I was gone, and then you were gone, and so we said, let's just do it Sunday, and I think that's going to work out probably the best for all of us.
Me too.
So, let's get started. Huge, long career. You've seen places all over the world. You've taken those stories and turned them into other stories in your books. But let's kind of go back to where it all started. When you first decided on the Marine Corps, was it a sense of duty? Was it family? Was it something deeper in your gut that you just wanted to do?
I think that is what eventually evolved. I will say that I'm the son of a Army officer. My father was a colonel in the Army, and so I grew up in that. As a career soldier, I grew up in military environment. We moved a little bit when I was a kid, but eventually settled outside of Washington, D.C. And I joined the military probably more for self-interest in a lot of ways. Yes, there was the idea of serving, but I think there was a deeper, or I wasn't experiencing that on the deeper level that it became. Because at the time it was the interwar years, if you will, between the Cold War and what became the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, the late 1990s. And I had originally tried to join the Army. I wanted to be a Green Beret, or at least thought that was the what I wanted to pursue. But again, I was only going to do it for 4 or 5 years. I was really a means to an end. I had a high ideal of being a federal law enforcement agent, something like a marshal or an FBI agent, maybe diplomatic security. Those all seemed very exciting to me. And in that area, that's kind of my idea of service. And I know that you certainly understand that. So it was going to be a resume builder. And then it became something much more as things progressed.
It's interesting that you say, though, you wanted to come in, be a Green Beret, and only do 4 or 5 years. And
I know that seems rather truncated.
Well,
like, oh, I'll just get this done, and then I'll. But not really understanding the commitment of that. Knowing what I know now, I see exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, but even further than that, you're looking at what you say you want to be a Green Beret, and that has a very long history. So does Marsoc and the Raiders specifically. But, the Marine Corps was had that thrust upon them during the Global War of Terror. They were told that they would have a special operations unit. So it's interesting to me that you look at this one that's been around and continuous forever. Then you go over to the Marine Corps and you end up joining and spending so much time in one that was actually, like I said, thrust upon the Marines.
Yes, and that again, that wasn't in the plan. I kind of had an idea of like, okay, I'll be in the military for this short amount of time, and I'm gonna cram in as much of, that I can. And you know that sounds very selfish, but that was how I approached it. And when the Army didn't work out for me joining the Army, there's a couple mostly administrative things that didn't quite click for me to do so. Although I had a application there. But the Marine Corps is a very good sales program, and there's an old Jody, the old running cadence says, "Mama told Johnny not to go downtown." Uh, well, Mama told Ivan not to go downtown because the Marine Corps recruiter was hanging around, and he got me in, and he got me in pretty quickly. And then there's certainly, they changed the optic on everything. It's just a very professional organization. It's not to say there aren't professionals and very hardworking people in other services, particularly the Army. I actually spent quite a bit of time working with the Army as a result in my career. But I was very, I think I became enamored of the Marine Corps culture without really knowing anything about it. And the way that was presented, and sure enough, you fall for the posters, you see guys in dress blues, and you're kind of like, all right, that's for me. And so then from there, one of the questions I asked is like, what does the Marine Corps have in the way of special operations? And I was told that they didn't have anything, per se within the SOCOM, Special Operations Command structure, but there were opportunities out there to do different things, and one of them was force reconnaissance, and I had not really heard anything about that either. And then I started looking into that, and I thought, okay, well, I'll join the Marine Corps, and they've got this opportunity, and I'll try and pursue it. Again, not being completely informed on how these things actually work. So first, I had to get through OCS and all of my introductory training before we really started, pursuing that as a goal. But yeah, that the irony is that it eventually would lead to, yes, along most of my career, a long stint within SOCOM itself and Marsoc in particular.
Well, do you think that's kind of advantage though? You didn't really know that much about the Marine Corps, so I don't really think, speaking, generally, you can be let down. So when you come in and you don't really know that much about it, everything seems like it's got a shiny patina to it.
I've had to have been a recruiter's dream. I didn't ask a lot of questions. I wandered in. I was like, this is for me. And the guy probably was thinking in his mind, like, wow, where did you come from? And then, are there more of you? So this just makes my job easier. So yeah, I think there was, well, I know there was a naivete there. I think there was a strong sense that I was going to get involved in something very interesting. Again, I had another goal as a result of going in. But on the other side, yeah, I was pretty motivated, pretty enamored of the process, and that held on for quite a while. I have to say, maybe I'm just a bit of an idealist in some capacity, but at least towards what I think things are supposed to be. And I held on to that for a little while.
I'd kind of like to know the moment that you put on the uniform. And the reason I want to know kind of the emotions that run through you and things like that is because you had such a short term vision of what your service was going to be.
That's when I initially mentioned that I wasn't really sure of the evolution, or at least, what that impact would be. I think I just sort of saw it as going to be a part of my life, a phase of my life that just would contribute to something more. And I wasn't trying to put as much importance on it as I thought it perhaps deserved. But I will say, the Marine Corps is very good um, with its propaganda. The Marine Corps is very good with its education of its force, and it is very effective. And it's not just platitudes. They really push forward what it means to be part of this organization, and to be proud of that fact. And I have to say that it was one thing when I was issued uh, my camis, my BDUs, and I was, that was my uniform. But I remember as we got close to the end of OCS, and people had been dropped for all kinds of reasons, whether it was disciplinary or physical, or they'd quit on their own. But we had fewer and fewer people inside of our platoon, And we were told, when you finish this, you'll have actually accomplished something. Becoming a Marine officer is not something to be sneered at. And when they handed me the Eagle Globe and Anchor and said, you're now a U.S. Marine, even now as I'm telling you that, I have this wave of emotional pride. And that's kind of when I think it started taking on uh, a different patina. It got brighter. I was like, wow, okay, this is something different. It just, you don't know what you're getting into in some ways. And as I said, the other thing, when I was in OCS, I had a lot of prior enlisted guys who are now commissioning as officers. So I had people who could kind of put their arm around me and guide me along through this process and help me understand a little bit more about the culture I was getting into. Um, and so that helped as well. And I've felt more connected to it as an accomplishment than just something I was doing. And then the day I got commissioned, that was a pretty tremendous day as well.
It's funny though that you say that, that was the day that you still get emotions about. I had asked a prior guest on what was their most important like moment in their military career. Was it when they were awarded a medal or whatever? And they said the same thing. It was the day they were given their Eagle Globe and Anchor. And it just seems strange to me that is so important. I mean, I get it that that's the basis, but that's just the beginning of your career.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of told them the same thing, that I would think on your career, when you look back on it, such an insignificant moment in time becomes such an important thing.
Yes. Things are it's about goal achievement. It's about a completion, feeling like that you have done something valuable. And let's face it, the Marine Corps has for a long time had its recruiting slogan, we're looking for a few good men. But really it's more of if you want to do this, we dare you. I mean, come try.
Do you think that was your whole career? They did that for everything that you did? Come
In
try. I dare
the
you.
units and things that I started serving in, yes, it was hands down. That was kind of a dangle.
So what did those first years, what did they teach you about like discipline, sacrifice, things like that?
That kind of starts almost day one in OCS, particularly in officer education. The concept of being a servant leader and understanding leadership traits and principles is really driven into you as early as an officer candidate. And then after that, you go to what's called the basic school, which is a 6-month training school or school where officers receive their real training on how to, now they're commissioned, on how to actually act as not only a member of a unit but lead others for longer periods of time. And you're now getting evaluated on your skills as a leader, and also how you adapt to this new environment. And every Marine officer goes through it. It's 6 months long. It seems interminable when you're there, but it's over pretty quickly. And then from there, you're awarded your military occupational specialty, which you then go on to your actual school. So if you're a pilot, everyone, as I said, Marine officers go through that, pilots included. If you're a pilot, you're then going to head down to Pensacola and start your pilot training. And the rest of us who got grounded MOSs, we would then go to our follow-on school. Mine just stayed at Quantico because I became an infantry officer. And the more I went through the training at DBS, I really enjoyed being in the field and going on patrol. And like I said, I was pretty motivated, and probably most of my peers were like, "This guy, just let him go. he's going to carry it. He's going to carry it forward." But I mean, I was enthusiastic about it, and I liked all of the aspects of it. I liked live fire training, and I liked the potential that you might be able to employ this at some point. Because again, this is in the 1990s. There's not much going on in the world as far as protracted action. And then as you get into this and you become, and as I went to the infantry officer course, then my instructors, some of whom had actually been in limited engagements in like Haiti, or maybe they're a Gulf War guy or two, maybe Bosnia. But they're still the ones who had any experience, and they start telling you, you're kind of like, hey, this is what could happen. So be prepared. And that kind of lent some immediacy to the training. But that first part, so my first year was going to OCS, then CBS, followed by infantry officer course. And then from there, I went to my first unit.
So what year are we talking about? Because there is that time period between, I would say, like middle to late 90s, that there's really not a lot going on in the world.
I joined in December of 1997. I
Okay.
went to, and then I spent all of 98 at Quantico, and then I moved to my first duty station, which was in Camp Pendleton, California, in '99. And then I would be out. I spent the first part of my career out in Camp Pendleton.
Okay. So, you know, when 9/11 happens, because 99, you got about 2 years until that happens. It's a build up to them, but it's a quiet build up. When it actually happens, what changes in your ideas about what you're going to do?
Well, I'd already been on a deployment at that time, what was called a Westpac, a Western Pacific deployment, which was as part of a Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is my battalion, my infantry battalion, as part of a composite unit deployed, the MEU, deployed on ships, sailed not only into the Pacific, but then worked our way around through different parts of the Pacific, like East Timor, Singapore, um, and then from there to the Middle East, where we were participated as part of Operation Southern Watch, which is the post Gulf War agreement, kind of keeping Iraq contained. Um, I really didn't do anything there. East Timor was actually it was a combat mission, but not exactly a kinetic firefight type of mission. But I participated in that with my infantry unit. And then once we came back, I had designs before I deployed to actually, because I wanted to do the force recon. Um, I wanted to get into force recon, and I had to take their indoctrination test, but they did not have room for an officer. There was a very small organization, but First Recon Company, as part of the First Marine Division, did. And so I took their test, passed it, and then from there secured orders to go to First Recon once I returned from that deployment in the infantry. So I was serving at First Recon, and as 9/11 takes place, or happens, I remember my wife woke me up in our house and said, and it's because we're on the West Coast at this point in time, so it's about 6 o'clock in the morning. And she said, you need to come and see this on the TV. And I remember I walked into the living room to see what the second plane hit, and I said to myself, I said, this has changed everything. And I was at that point, just prior to that, getting ready to re-engage with the law enforcement recruiters for those different agencies that I talked about. I hadn't started a formal process, but I was thinking, okay, let me start moving this forward incrementally. And then at that point, I thought, wow, this is big. We don't know what's going to happen, and then things started to just progress from there. But yeah, I think all of us were stunned, of course, that morning. But for us in the military, um, and First Recon had people who were already deployed on MEUs who ended up going right into Afghanistan into action as a result, and we kind of had to watch that unfold, not only in real time, but people that we knew were now out and engaged. Kind of going back to what I was talking about with my uh, infantry officer course, my IOC instructors, who said you never know what's going to happen, and you need to be ready. And sure enough, they were right.
So, are you more focused now? Because, like we once again talked about in the beginning, you were going to be a Green Beret, but then you change over to the Marine Corps. Now you're in kind of that same situation where you're looking at law enforcement, but you're still in the Marine Corps. Do you think you shift focused and said that this might be the life for me, not that federal law enforcement?
Yes, that's an accurate statement. I, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say I just pushed it to the side, like, okay, I'm not going to embrace that. Because later in my career, I actually did look at going back in the FBI. Um, but but at that point in time, no, I realized that this was going to be something was going to be happening, and it was going to be fairly big. Particularly when shortly after uh, President George W. Bush gets on the television and announces that we're fighting an axis of evil, which includes North Korea and Iran. So now we're trying to figure out if we're going to be in a global engagement of some kind. Which, I mean, I guess it became that way as far as the GWOT, but we meant more conventionally. We really just didn't know what that was, and that was pretty that's pretty aggressive language at that point in time. But of course, we're all very we're all trying to figure it out in real time. That was, I remember just what a chaotic period of time that was, and I think people who didn't go through that cannot understand necessarily the amount of national fear that was felt, and not the uncertainty of that time. So yeah, I think that just kind of flipped the switch to a full commitment.
Right. How long in your mind, did you think that this conflict was going to happen when it first kicks off? Because I've heard a lot of people say, I never thought it would go 20 years. I thought we would go, do the mission and come back. They never in their entire life imagined that it would last as long as it did.
I did not think that I would spend the majority of my adult life serving in combat zones somewhere. And that's not to say I was there all 20 years in a row. It's just being deployed and continually addressing different parts of the campaign, I guess we could call it that. I didn't think that at all. I think there's in the early parts of a conflict, and you can see this in World War One in particular, World War Two. People are afraid they're going, particularly if you're in the military, a soldier, a Marine. If you're into it and you want to kind of get into the combat, or you want to be tested in some capacity, you're afraid you'll miss your opportunity. And I think that very much permeated. I thought, wow, I may not get the opportunity to do this, because you didn't know who was going to get deployed. It was so open ended in many ways, that we thought either would be quick, or we would take the conflict only as long as it needed to go. And what I mean by that is we hope there would be defined goals, and once we achieve them, we would say, okay, we did what we had to do. But I think that in many ways we lost sight of that in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I won't get too far ahead in the interview, but in the early stages, we were all hoping we would just get to it, and hoping that we would be able to participate in something that was going to be pretty big.
So let me ask you, do you think they kept moving the goalposts then?
I think there was never a true definition of what victory looked like, because if you remember, we went into Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden. That was the original goal, and it was a very much special operations focused war, working with local forces. Certainly there was a conventional aspect to it, and then we're there for another 10 years past that, and then Osama bin Laden is eventually killed, and at that point we should have been, okay, that's it, we came here and did what we needed to do. I think there was a very big idea between Afghanistan and Iraq that somehow we would remap the Middle East and portions of the world in ways that worked well for the United States, so we can continue managing world affairs, particularly in those volatile areas, in ways that was appealing to us. And when that didn't work the way that was maybe expected or had been analyzed, it decided, let's throw more at this, because that we'll eventually win this. And then once that became clear that was not necessarily working, then it became more of a maintenance piece, and eventually it had to end. It's super expensive, not only in treasure, but definitely in blood. And when you talk about moving the goalpost, I think it was just inventing new goalposts. Well, we'll make this happen. Okay, we'll move this way. Okay, phases wise, I mean, you could break it down in any way. I'm sure that the war will be analyzed in all kinds of ways, and continues to be. Um, but I can't ever recall someone showing me the campaign plan and saying, okay, these are the things we need to accomplish, and this is what your role is in it to get us to that.
But I don't think, in everything that you just said right there, I don't think that they could ever tell one unit, this is what you will do, if there's not defined goals.
And that is a very frustrating thing, particularly as someone who's, told you're going to deploy, you go here. I mean, that's not to say that when I was deployed, there wasn't someone saying, okay, here's what we're looking to accomplish. I meant in the bigger, larger thing, like this is what victory in Afghanistan looks like for us. This is what success in Iraq looks like for us. And we, we just never had a good handle, or at least particularly our politicians did not have a particularly good handle on what was happening in those countries and how those countries were reacting to the things that we were doing. They were under no obligation to accept how we were trying to manage their internal affairs in a lot of ways. So
So
we
let
had
me
to
ask you then,
react to that.
right. So let me ask you then, as an officer, how frustrating is that? Because people are giving you orders when there's not, like we said, there's not a real goal that can be attained or anything like that. And then you're taking those commands and giving them down to your people with no real explanation to them.
Um, I worked with very intelligent guys who understood that we were serving based upon what our country was asking us to do. And we're not being told to do anything immoral or illegal.
Right.
And certainly weren't being told to do anything unethical. And we did have um, objectives of things we were trying to accomplish, but there was a lot of ways of keeping pressure on the enemy, particularly in Afghanistan, that just seemed to be a continual, uh, almost like a chore. And then we would pass that on from one unit to the next. Um, we were successful, at least in keeping the enemy on their heels. One of the goals was to get violence down to a manageable level, and we did. That doesn't mean eradication. It doesn't mean stability. Does not necessarily mean peace. And so the goal was, I mean, we were out there to find and fight to help perpetuate or develop larger programs, which we did to the best of our ability. And I talked to a friend of mine who's a former Vietnam veteran, and I asked him, what did you think? What did you think at the end? I mean, all these years later, how do you carry with you what you did in your service? How do you reconcile some of the things that you did in your service based upon, let's call it what it is, the stain that Vietnam is on our American psyche? And he said, Ivan, you have to just be proud of your service and that you did what you could, and the rest of it was out of your control. And for you, and he's told me this, for you, you led with integrity and kept your people at the forefront. And I did, you did the absolute best that you could, and you have to be proud of that and proud of your service. Otherwise, it will eat you up. There's this larger thing that you couldn't affect, and he was in his right.
Well, don't you think, comparing everything, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, any of the conflicts that we're in, I think that Vietnam and Afghanistan very closely model each other.
I believe so, and that comes back to what you were talking about. Is we couldn't define what that victory would look like in either case. And as you change administrations and regimes, you're you're, you're within the United States. You're just kind of resetting things, um, and then moving forward with yet another policy setup, or establishment of policy that then says this is what they believe it should look like. Um, and we just lost sight of what we were doing in both cases. I really believe that.
I would even take it to the very end where you talk about the fall of Saigon and then our exit out of Afghanistan. You could even compare it down to there where you have people at very high levels that are making decisions that have no idea what's going on at the ground level.
Correct. And it, both in both cases, absolutely disastrous. In both cases, they happened much more quickly. Although in South Vietnam, I think took a couple of years, but it happened much more quickly than in either case than the American political establishment anticipated. And then I think what's really just galling is at the end is just the lack of accountability and the lack of acknowledgement of the role of ignoring all of that. As you said, not really getting you know ground truth and accepting it for what it is, even after the fact. And President Joe Biden did that after the investigation at Abbey Gate and what happened at Bagram Airfield at the end. The results were handed to him. He's like, I just reject this. This is not. I don't care. What do you do?
Yeah. And like I said, I've got to understand, like with you, and I ask a lot of guys this, is at that point, do you feel like I know that it will always mean something to you? It was always for the right reason, that you always did that. But does it make it seem all for nothing when you see stuff like that?
There's a futility there. I have to believe that there it was worth something. I mean, the American public did want to feel safe. Um, to say that we were combating uh, external threats in other countries so they didn't affect us in the United States is not necessarily accurate. And what I mean by that is we were in those countries for so long that it became that it was us who were embroiled inside of those countries, vice keeping anybody from coming into our own to cause us harm. And there are plenty of people who could debate that as far as the number of fighters that may or may not have conditioned another attack, against U.S. interests on our soil. But I think the major frustration comes down to, as I said, we're doing what we can in a kind of localized level, particularly year after year or deployment after deployment, and you see the sheer number of people that are your friends are being killed or wounded, families affected. That's the long-term impact, really. And to see that and not be able to say, man, we beat the Nazis, and that's we brought the world back to a stable world order that would exist, for the next 80 some odd years. We don't get that. And in a lot of ways, I'm not saying we need a victory parade, but in a lot of ways, it's just sort of like, well, thank you for serving so that I didn't have to. And it's just sort of the strudge. Hey, you were out there in Afghanistan, you were out there in Iraq, but I believe there's a big disconnect, a big detachment between the U.S. population and the veterans, particularly because we veterans who served in the GWAT, we don't look old by comparison, right? We're not. Some guys are part of the VFW, part of the American Legion, but we're not the old guys sitting in wheelchairs, of which they're getting fewer and fewer. Never mind the Vietnam era. That we were brought up, that people put out to us as like, this is what heroics look like. This is what real service members are. The rest of us are kind of blended back into a population. If the youngest guy who went in at 18 in the year 2000, he's only 43 years old right now. So because of that, I think we get a little bit overlooked. And I think that's a difficult thing. But writ large, the only way we can really make it worth it is to remember the people that we lost and remember that we were told we were out there to defend American ideals and the democratic process. I say this before, I've said this before. I believe in democracy with the big D, and I believe in the republic with the big R. But I'm neither Democrat or Republican. I think that's too narrow. I think we were doing what we thought was correct. And yeah, it's a tough thing to look back on, even today. 4 years later, after I look at Abbey Gate and think the time investment, God knows the money this country invested and lost. Awash in debt right now. but it wasn't like we willingly were pushing that along. At least us on the ground, we were doing what we were told, and you're hoping your higher level commanders are going and politicians for that matter are going to have an understanding of what that of why you're there and what they're showing or why you're what you're supposed to produce. Stumbling a little bit there, and then that just becomes a little bit opaque. And it's one thing to say we're defending the country, but after a while you get frustrated that okay, I've done that, but where I lost Marines and had people killed in these little hamlets and these firefights that we were in sometimes insignificant places, how do I can go to those people's children and their families and say he was a hero and he did his job, which they did undoubtedly. But for a bigger picture piece, I would like to be able to tell them more than just, he was doing his service. Like it mattered on this level because these are the things that we've been able to perpetuate. And don't get too deep on hating the deep state. There's a lot of ways to get angry about, sort of the higher level mismanagement, particularly political and I would say corporate levels that kind of help push this thing along. There's a lot of money to be made in all of this, BJ, and they did.
When you talk about that you guys didn't get your victory parade and stuff, I think the truly sad part of that whole statement is that you talk about World War II, and it was an amazing thing that we did over there. And you're right, we did stop the Nazis, bring that world order back and everything. But you're talking guys spent 4, 5, 6 maybe years doing everything from totality, from beginning to end. They're guys that you've worked with, and including yourself, that spent your entire career at war.
Yes.
Over 20 years of their career at war. What that does to the mind, what that does to the physicality of the body is what makes it the most sad to me that you guys don't get your victory parade.
Yeah, and I think they call the World War II generation the greatest generation, and rightfully so. But I think what we did was pretty great. I mean, we did shoulder that burden, and we were volunteers, and we did it year after year alone. And that doesn't make me better than someone else. That's not me, wagging my finger saying you weren't there, you don't understand. It was really more of just like, this was my job, this was my career, and this, yes, was expected of us to go and do this. But there's sort of that goes back to that detachment. I don't think people understand what that commitment really, really meant. And it's a tough thing to explain to somebody who doesn't do that. Like I have friends whose their children are now in the military, and they don't really conceive of what a deployment looks like, and why you would go to these countries for 6 to 8 months for deployed training, that kind of thing. They just kind of don't understand, the idea that we're projecting American policy, or at least American presence in some of the areas of the world that require it. I mean, yes, we have, for good or for ill, become the hegemon power out there. We have over 700 bases or something like that worldwide, where we can project American military might for very good reasons. But on the other side, because not everybody is involved in serving in the military, particularly for long periods of time, as like a career, then they don't understand, that full commitment and what it means to continually have to go out and do that. And during the GWAT, our major focus, and yes, there were people in Germany, there were people in other parts of the world, but our major focus was Iraq and Afghanistan. And then after a while, I think people just were like, wow, you're serving in Afghanistan. And I think they wondered what it was all about. And then they wondered why we were doing that. Like, why are you continually having to go back there? And that's what I mean, is we couldn't necessarily define that to the population either.
When you say, though, we have 700 bases and posts and forts all over the world where we can go from, it's interesting, though, and I want to ask you, why aren't there those full-time bases in Afghanistan? Why aren't there those full-time bases, those duty stations in Iraq and in different places like that where they're truly needed? That tells me of something higher, that we fought in these places forever, but we fought in Germany too. There's bases in Germany. We have that kind of reach. Why do you think that we don't have permanent bases there?
There may have been an idea that we would, but you got to remember we got in Germany and Japan, we had total capitulation.
Of course.
We never had that in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in fact, there was a desire, particularly at the political level, to ensure that the Afghan parliament and the Iraqi parliament were self-governing and they were running things in their own countries, which I think is valuable. So those countries have to accept that they would want us there, but politically, but within the population, that just wasn't going to be tenable. We had all kinds of bases set up all over Afghanistan, and probably could have maintained them, perpetually. Same in, I mean, we invested billions of dollars in infrastructure in both of these countries, so those could have been maintained. But us having bases in the bases that we do have in the peaceful countries, we still had to establish them, and they still require a tremendous amount of maintenance for people going over there, to people living there, to their salaries, to all of the things that go into that. Afghanistan and Iraq, you're not going to have that kind of stability where you can move your family with you over there and be able to live on a base and feel safe. They're just too volatile. And my buddy Scott Husing, who wrote an excellent book called Echo in Ramadi, that's one of his observations. He in and of himself has his own story and heroic story as a commander in combat. He lost Marines, and he believes that we should have had an extended presence to ensure that we just kept up not only the pressure, but we're able to just say, hey, we're not going anywhere. You don't get to win this one. And I think the investment not only became monetarily untenable, but it became politically very unpopular that we were going to be continuing in each of those places.
I think you need to look at, though, the point too of when people in their own countries, you talked about the parliament of Iraq, the parliament of Afghanistan, when those countries don't want the stability on their own, that's got to make you question something. They don't want the safety, the security, the stability that having that big stick just in presence being there. It makes you kind of think, why continue to go over there and try and push that ideal to them?
Correct. And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier with once we finally got Osama bin Laden, we should have just cut ties, because we'd already figured out that the Afghans didn't want us there. And, they were saying, let the Afghans do it tolerably enough. They don't have to do it to American standard. And we put all this money into their military, into their parliament, helping them build infrastructure, trying to get them to adopt things that we believed was important and would work. But they're like, look, we're an agrarian farmer country that's full of very superstitious people. I mean, I went to just as an example, I went to a village that had a former school that had been knocked down and had been built by the UN much earlier than when we got there. UNICEF, the United Nations humanitarian aid program, and I saw that because there was a plaque that was actually sunk into the concrete of this now destroyed building, but it had been a school that had been built in this very rural part of Afghanistan to help educate people. And the reason it was wrecked is because they were setting up a school that was allowing young girls to be educated there too. And you can't get a culture or people who believe that to change. And you can't throw money at it and say, okay, if you just see it this way, it's going to work. They believe what they believe, and that becomes really hard you can't surmount it.
Yeah. I mean, you said they didn't want the Americans there. They didn't want the Russians there. They didn't want, we can go back and back and back in history and show the people that they did not want there in Afghanistan.
Correct. And Iraq was a lot the same way. Now, to be fair, I will caveat this, that I did not serve in Iraq, not in the ways that has been, direct combat direct operations there. But I'll make correlations between the two based upon the politics. But my primary combat experience resides in Afghanistan. So I just want to caveat that before I say, well, in Iraq, because
Right.
I wasn't in Mosul, I was not in it, I was not in Ramadi. But those two countries have an idea of what they want for their people, and what those and that in many ways went counter to what we, i.e., the Americans, wanted for them. See what I mean? Like they're
Right.
yeah.
But I think you spending so much time in Afghanistan, because I want to really, kind of drill in on that. The majority of your time was spent in Afghanistan, which I think is maybe a way more primitive war. You talk to guys that were in Iraq, and there's parts of Iraq that are nice. There's parts of that are beautiful and things like that. I've never really heard anyone say, other than, the mountains and everything are beautiful, but not really fond memories of Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's very agrarian. Most of the construction is particularly out in the hinterlands is all done by hand, with mud and bricks made from the ground. There are indeed places like if you got to Kabul or Kandahar, some of the larger cities that do have, I won't call them high rises, but they have, more modern buildings. There are places that actually have very well-to-do people in their houses, than you would expect, but nothing on the level of like the first world. We're not talking about, Kabul looking like downtown London. It's just, there's like this clash of the modern and then just what they're used to traditionally. And some people wanted to embrace that very much and tried to get Afghanistan, the populace, to come along with that, but it was not widely adopted. And one of the things that was attempted with the Afghan National Army was to make it homogenous. So they just brought people in from all over the place to serve together side by side. But you have tribal distinctions and ethnic distinctions that just don't commingle there. And you can't just push them all together like we do in the United States. Say, hey, you're from Chicago and you're from LA, and you're just going to have to figure it out. There, it's so deeply rooted that in Afghanistan, they can't get past it. And so that's a lot to ask, to have this army have pride in being Afghans, where they're really more thinking, I'm a Pashto, I'm a Hazar, and this is where I'm from. I'm from this province. I'm from this village. I'm from this area. And that's what another thing we very much underestimated was just how deep those tribal distinctions and identity ran. We acknowledged it, but we just didn't. For us, it was, if we were a foreign concept to them, for us, the things that they were doing were just something we couldn't get our hands around either. And those became at odds the further we tried to, develop them.
Okay, so now we've kind of set up the battleground, as you would say. I want to digress for a minute and go back. With you being with Force Recon, and then as we talked about, the Marines being kind of had special operations thrust upon them with Marsoc, you're at the beginning of that, correct?
Yes, I was there as it happened.
Okay, so I've heard from numerous guys that say Marsoc, when you looked at it in the very beginning in the Raiders, there's just like portable buildings that they're using for command staffs and all of that kind of stuff, and that they're not really given everything that they need, yet they're being looked at through the fishbowl of, you better make this work with whatever we give you. Would you agree with that?
That is true. I would say that the units, the structure was put together from pre-existing units, and so those units did have homes, so to speak. They had buildings and places to live, but we have a large compound down in Marsoc compound down in Lejeune now, is at that point was just a sketch on a napkin. Like we didn't have anything like that at all. The units were spread out all over, not only the East and the West Coast, but within that you had different locations. Getting everything together was generally difficult. So, and then yes, in order to expand and for more personnel, armories, for more equipment. Yeah, you had to get temporary buildings or facilities, find other buildings. Yeah, so it was a little bit haphazard there. I'll say this: when I was in Force Recon, we were tied to the Muse. We generally had a pretty good budget, for the small unit that we were compared to our size, and enjoyed a little bit more freedom of action because of the training and things that we would do. When we became Marsoc, the SOCOM logistics and supply people came and took a look at our inventories, and we thought we were doing pretty good as Force Recon went. And they looked at our armories and they looked at our equipment and they said, "How have you been doing this? Like, you're so poor, you don't even know how poor you are. So we need to upgrade a lot, from night vision goggles to helmets to body armor systems and all kinds of things." And I wouldn't say it was a blank check, but they literally were like, go get what you need and tell us what we can do to help make things happen. So we got an infusion of GWAT SOCOM money to help build out our weapon systems and our vehicles, and that really was good. And one thing that Marsoc wanted to ensure was, despite all the infusion of cash and training, that we didn't lose our professionalism. And one thing I will give Marsoc credit for, and this is again not to say that any of the other services are not professional and people within it are not capable, but Marine Corps is very much known for sort of a rigidity, which can be a blessing and a curse. But with Marsoc in particular, they wanted to make sure we were not going to just run completely off the rails and become something else, and not controllable is not the word, but lose ethos. And I think the Marine Corps has done a good job of blending that Marine ethos with special operations capabilities, because the Marsoc forces that are being trained and put out now are very, very good. I mean, it's impressive pipeline and impressive way that they not only recruit but also train and equip Marsoc operators. So, but at that point in time, that was all in its infancy. Like, we didn't have any of that.
So let me bring up a point then, and I want to see if you agree with it. I would say you had two very distinct Marine Corps there when Marsoc is getting started, okay? You had the regular Marine Corps and you had Marsoc, guys that really wanted to be there, do this special operations. But I think the Marine Corps, set in their ways, didn't want that. And I think that caused a lot of stumbles along the way when Marsoc is getting started, because you're getting so much pullback that we don't want this. I've heard Marines are already special. We don't need special operations.
That is true. Well, you have to remember that at the time, Commandant General Hagee, he was just told, as you mentioned, he was told by Rumsfeld, "Hey, you're doing this, so figure it out." So already from the top, he's been directed to do something he doesn't want to do. There was never an idea to expand it larger than what it had been. Which if you read John Daly's excellent book, Tough Rugged Bastards, about the formation and missions of Marine Detachment 1, SOCOM Detachment 1, and that was the proof of concept the Marines could work within SOCOM structure and perform, and they did an excellent job. But beyond that, the Marine Corps had no intention of expanding it further, even though there was an idea that they should. So, in classic Marine Corps inefficiency, they stand down that unit. Hagee is then told, "Hey, you're going to stand up this unit," which he then has to. And from there, yes, there's quite a bit of internal
struggle,
stonewalling and struggle. Yeah, there's a lot of resentment. And then it comes down to, like you were talking about, hey, what is the special ops mindset? What defines that? And so they grabbed us at 2nd Force Recon and 1st Force Recon and said, "You're already proven to SOCOM, because we've seen your recon predecessors, i.e., Det 1, do really great things. So you're coming on board, and then we'll figure out the rest. That'll at least give us a core infrastructure of people that we can do this." Well, that's a nice nod to be told you've got what it takes, particularly by people who are evaluating you on the SOCOM side. But on another, that doesn't change your entire how you develop a mindset and how you develop a unit culture and unit identity, um, which, kind of goes against the grain of what the Marine Corps is about. And as you said, let's go all the way back to me getting commissioned. I'm handed the Eagle Globe and Anchor, and I'm not told anything other than you're now a U.S. Marine. And that was the pride I felt, right? So now you're grabbing people and saying, not only are you a U.S. Marine, but now you get to be something really different. And that caused a lot of heartache for people.
Well, and let me ask you then, because let's take the Army, for example. You got guys that are in the Ranger Battalion that want to be in the Ranger Battalion. They don't want to be a Green Beret. They don't want to go to Delta. They want to be Rangers. You got guys that are Green Berets that just want to be Green Berets. So how is that bringing everyone over? Because you can't have everyone on board that's coming over from First Force, from Second Force, coming over and they're saying, okay, now you're going to do this. I've got to believe there's got to be some guys that are like, I don't want to do this. I liked what I was doing over there.
There were, and there are. Not everybody wanted to do it. When it came time for us to get an official MOS, military occupational specialty designation, no kidding, be called Special Operations Marines, there were people who were reconnaissance Marines who said, I just want to continue being a recon Marine and serve in that community. And they did so very effectively. And there's a lot of crossover between those two. I would call it pollination. I still have plenty of friends who served as O321s, which is the designation for reconnaissance Marines. I was a reconnaissance Marine. I was a reconnaissance officer as well as a special operations officer. Nothing but respect for people who wanted to stay and do the Marine Corps, do the job on the Marine Corps side. I mean, you're doing very, very similar things. It's just a matter of kind of who you're working for. And Marsoc just enjoys a little more, certainly budgeting, but also, mission supply by way of SOCOM. On the recon side, though, within the Marine Corps, I will say this: I worked on a very sensitive project, and I was a liaison between a special operations unit and a Marine unit. And I was asked by the special operations unit, if we have to call a QRF, do you have Force Recon Marines? There were no Marsoc guys out there. I was a Marsoc guy, but I was doing this as a SOCOM LNO. And I said, yeah, we got a whole Marine Raid Force MRF. And they said, well, that's who we want to have come reinforce us on the ground if we need it. So that's a reputation. I mean, it hasn't gone anywhere.
People know they're going to bring Thor's hammer with them when they come there.
Absolutely. And that's what they wanted. This unit was like, okay, that they took that at face value, right? DJ, they were just like, all right, well, if that's who's showing up, perfect. That's what we want.
So do you think in the beginning, and I'm talking about the very beginning of Marsoc, do you think you guys are kind of stepchildren?
I think we're trying to get out from underneath foster care in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah. I mean, you got it was exciting. There was a lot happening in the world. The GWAT is kind of in its infancy. We've already invaded Iraq. We're still in Afghanistan. So now we got 2 different places you can serve. There are tons of what we perceive as opportunities. Never mind, there's other stuff going on. We've got to remember that SOCOM's engaged, or at least performing missions all over the world. So you've got guys in PACOM, Pacific Command. You've got guys down in SOUTHCOM who are continuing missions that are not, they're GWAT related, but they're not direct action combat inside of Afghanistan and Iraq. So yeah, there was this tremendous amount of opportunity, and we finally thought, okay, if you weren't on a MU, you really couldn't get any action. You really weren't going to do anything unless there was a big invasion and they pulled everyone over there, kind of like they did with Second Force in the early part of the war, consolidating with First Force. But also, the unit actually deploying en masse did not happen very often. And so at this point, we were like, wow, okay, we're going to be able to not only be deployed, but we'll be employed as we've trained to do. So yeah, that was an exciting time.
Do you think more, and more my question, I mean, by stepchild, do you think that you guys didn't get the respect that you deserved from the very top echelon of command?
Are you talking on the Marine Corps side?
Yes.
Oh, sure. I mean, people wanted to see it fall. I think some people saw it as this will be an experiment, and then we'll move on.
Doesn't that seem crazy to you?
Totally. The better way to kind of adjust to this is to look at the Marine Corps and Marsoc. If the marriage was working well, you would have units that are forward deployed that could actually help the Marine Corps get into doing different things, because the Marine Corps writ large, particularly on their MEUs, bring a tremendous amount of capability to it, whether it's humanitarian aid or full-on kinetic combat. But there's, because of the division, if you will, between SOCOM and the services, and that means all of the services, that sometimes leads to parochialism, and the Marine Corps is parochial as well. But yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of guys who were just like, this is not necessary. I mean, I had infantry, I was an infantry officer before I got into all of this, and I had guys who were peers of mine in the infantry. It was like, why do we need Marsoc? This is ridiculous. There's nothing that you guys are doing that we couldn't do. I'm like, okay, well, where's the mission? Who's dividing it? Who's advocating on the Marine Corps side to get them in, get us, writ large into the things that we're going to be involved in? And the reason this whole thing was stood up is because SOCOM needs more manpower and assets to accomplish its mission. That's what it came down to. So if you want the Marine Corps to get on there and get on board, then there needs to be way more aggressive advocacy for the service. But you got to remember, a MEU goes out on deployment, and the Marine Corps doesn't own that anymore. I mean, they're still Marines, but it's owned by the combatant commander, and how it gets employed and everything else is actually kind of convoluted. It's actually an outdated idea. And I'm not trying to get too past what we're talking about on the Marsoc side, but yes, I believe there are plenty of people who were against and still feel that, it's kind of a pointless exercise.
So are those just the people that at all costs they will protect the, I don't want to say integrity, but the idea of the Marine Corps at all costs?
They're Marine first. That's what they preach. And I don't disagree with that. But I mean, no one would go to the air wing and say, you're not a pilot, right? But if you're flying for the Marine Corps. Does that make sense? Like you're not going over there flying for the Air Force. So that's right. Kind of the difference. Is there is that husbanding, that protectionism.
So let's talk about the first time that you're in combat as a Marsoc guy. What rank are you at this time?
As a captain.
Okay. So you go over there. It's I would say an entirely new mission from what you did before, correct?
Yeah, it's my first combat deployment. And prior to that, my only other deployment was as an infantry platoon commander. And that, it was a good experience. I was in, like I said, East Timor, working in a combat environment, but we didn't get into any direct action. We didn't get into any sort of fighting. It was post the insurgency that was being fought there, particularly by the Australians. So I got to see firsthand what the results of combat look like, and being in an environment where it could be very dangerous. I was issued grenades. I was issued rounds. My Marines were as well. So that kind of changes the mindset. Like, oh gosh, like this is real. But again, we didn't get into any action. So in this case, in Afghanistan, I'd already been in Force Recon for a couple of years. The platoon that I had comprised almost exclusively of Iraq combat veterans. And I was kind of the new guy. There were a few other non-combat veterans as well, but for the most part, the guys who were in there had all experienced and been in protracted firefights and close quarter battle situations. So they were very tough, and I hate to say it, but judgmental in probably a good way. Just wondering how you're going to perform and what you're going to do. And we trained very hard. And so going into Afghanistan, I think we were very well trained. Certainly had the right mindset, but I didn't know what to expect as a commander.
Well, and the reason I say different from the job you did before, because like I said, when you go on that MEU as an infantry officer, you're what, a first lieutenant?
Yep.
Yeah, you're a first lieutenant when you do that. You don't you see the after effects of combat, but you don't really experience combat. And then you do Force Recon, but you never go to combat with them. And then you go to Marsoc, which is the elite of the elite. and you're coming over there as a captain, so you're going to be in charge of quite a few people.
Mhm.
The reason I ask, it's different than anything you've ever done before, because I think the stakes are eminently higher being in Marsoc and being a captain over there and have never seen combat before, combat that you're going to see in Afghanistan. So that's what I'm asking. Like, what are the emotions? Because you've got to be, stuff has got to be turning around in the wheel in your head over and over.
I wanted to ensure that I was doing that. I would make the right decisions, and I kind of went through um, all kinds of scenarios, but you never know how you're going to react when things happen. Um, and our training was very aggressive. We did a lot of live fire stuff, so being around gunfire and sort of chaos was something that we built into it. But you can't replicate the things that you would be doing in combat otherwise. The acceleration, the adrenaline that comes with that, and so I tried to equip myself as best I could with either reading, about other people's engagements or talking to the combat veterans that I had. In fact, I had a phone call with a guy before I deployed because I did have a lot of reservations, and he was an accomplished combat veteran. And he actually taught me a technique. His name is Master Sergeant Eden Pearl, who unfortunately succumbed to his wounds a number of years ago. But he told me, I've been watching you in training. I've been watching the way you do stuff. I've been to war, and you've got what it takes. You just need to have confidence in yourself, and don't worry about the rest of it. And that was a huge boost for going out the door. So yeah, I had a lot of misgivings. I wasn't sure if you talk about, now I'm part of all of this organization. I'm part of this legacy unit, or which will become, I'll become part of a legacy unit. And I didn't want to let down my guys, and certainly I didn't want to let down myself, but to be thought of as incompetent or unable to do my job, I just I didn't want that. So I tried very, very hard to hone my own edge and suppress those internal misgivings. And as a leader, that is a really hard thing, not only to recognize, but also to acknowledge and admit to. And I did.
So let's talk about your first time outside the wire. You're actually guiding men, Marsoc, into combat.
We talking the first firefight, or like my first
firefight? Well, you know what? Let's talk about the first time you're out, because those are two, I think, very important instances.
So when we would go over, we would switch out. We would do what's called a RIP, relief in place. And you would rip with the unit that had been there with you before. Now, if you're deployed inaugurally, then that was you, and then people would rip out with you. And at that point in time, Marsoc units were partnered with Army Special Forces units, kind of so that Army SF could take a look at Marsoc and say, "Hey, these guys deploy? Are they doing what they're supposed to? Did they meet the soft standard, which we did?" But it also helped build up the working relationship, because Army SF was out there as well. So you might run into other units. You might work concurrently on a larger objective, which we did do. But during the RIP that I was doing, there was a company that had deployed ahead of us, and we were now going to relieve them after they'd been out for 6 months. And we went out on our first real combat patrols into what would basically be the Badlands. And it was then that it became very real. Like, my rifle was loaded. I had done this before in East Timor, but now the chance of getting into something, the chance of something happening, were very real. And I don't have my entire unit with me. I have select leaders who are now partnered up with the unit we're relieving in place, to do a one-to-one exchange of knowledge with your counterpart. So there's not that many of us, and and more of the other unit. They're kind of guiding us along as we go out on. So we went out on a 3-day patrol to get the lay of the land. It's vehicle. It's not helicopter. And then we would set into patrol bases at night, and then continue to keep moving during the day. Sometimes we move at night to occupy territory during the day, which is much more effective. And that was the other thing, is because most of us were all Force Recon Marines. We were trained as reconnaissance Marines, and we applied those principles of patrolling and mission preparation. So the units ran very, very smoothly. But once we left that base, and now we were, on the battlefield, there was just this heightened sense of awareness that permeated all throughout the unit we were out there with. And we got into a couple of light firefights. I would say just exchanges of fire. Had a few indirect fire. We had a few mortar rounds fall on us. But one night, on the last night of the patrol, actually, before we were going to head back the next day, a vehicle rolled over what was later found to be a Russian anti-tank mine. And it destroyed the vehicle and killed one of the occupants and wounded quite a few others. And it was just actually just a horrible, horrible scene. And I remember right then, it just wasn't possibly real. And I was watching this vehicle burn and hearing the radio calls and waiting for a medevac helicopter. It seemed surreal that I was experiencing all of that. And I'm not saying I was like elevated, detached, and looking down on it. It just was like, wow, this is happening to me, around me, in real time. And I'm not just an observer. I'm a participant, or I'm participating in this. And I think that started to, things happen kind of incrementally. I think that you start understanding your operating environment. I think you probably can experience the same thing in your own line of work, where when you first start out, you're kind of taking everything in, and then after a while, you start to be able to pay attention to more and more. But for me, I was just complete novice at all of this when it was happening, or leading up to that. And then that first patrol when we got back, and that vehicle's destroyed. We have one dead. There's several wounded. People have been medevaced, and now you're back, and those people aren't with you anymore, and you have to inventory their gear and their stuff being cleaned up. It's this somber feeling within the unit. And that unit that we're ripping out with is about to go home. And they were taking us on a battlefield tour. They call it battlefield circulation. And that happened. From the shooting to the IDF, the indirect fire, and then that incident. So by the time we really got, I got back to my unit, and we were going to start doing this for real on our own, I had been introduced to what the stakes could be or would be, and they were only going to get higher from there.
In all your time that you spent over there, do you think because it's an interesting way to say it, that it was surreal. Does that ever go away? Do you ever get, I guess the word, do you ever get desensitized to it at a certain point in all of those deployments? Do you go, it's another Tuesday?
I like to say I hope not, but I couldn't tell you like, oh, that never happened. There are times you get in fire, like, oh, okay, we're getting shot at, like, and you know what to do, and you start focusing on that. You don't have that moment of like, oh, what am I going to do? Where you kind of tense up a moment. You do if you're in that environment, you know how it's going to happen, or at least you hear it happen. You kind of know how you're going to react. You get used to that, I think. But each situation is different. Each mission is different. You can't, there's an old saying, do it different, even if it's the same. Like you need to go into each one as they're fresh. You can't just assume anything away. The complacency will definitely get you killed, or definitely have you make mistakes. But I don't think I was ever so numb to everything that was happening that I felt that detachment you're describing. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I don't remember that in particular. But I do know that, each time I went out, I was like, okay, don't lose your edge. You have to approach this appropriately. Nothing is routine. And I would tell people like, this is not routine. Whether we're doing a run from one spot to the other or an actual no shit raid, you got to, a mission is a mission. You have to treat it the same way.
Does that seem odd that you have to tell yourself that?
I think in my own way, it was just a reassurance that I was not losing that edge you're talking about.
Well, I guess more of the question would be that you live a life, first responders, law enforcement, they live that life where they have to tell themselves over and over, this is not normal, this is not average, this is not just another Tuesday. And they're seeing just incomprehensible things unfold in front of them.
And I believe that might be a little bit of a protection as well. Because if you
Okay.
get too inured to that and you're just like, meh, it's just another car accident, then maybe you start losing a little bit of your humanity. And I mean, it's a human endeavor, what you're talking about. Warfare is a human endeavor. It requires a great deal of endurance, emotionally, spiritually, certainly physically. On the leadership side, not just officers, but people who are in leadership positions mentally. And if you start to crack or you start to assume things away, or you start looking at the enemy as not being human, that will really affect the way that you approach stuff. And it can affect your own people. And there is truth to stuff happening where your people look and go, what are we going to do? What now, sir? You hope that they react appropriately, going about what you were saying, hey, this is what happens when the shit hits the fan. And they do, but there are times when the situation gets sticky, and it is kind of like that. One of the accurate, there's a lot of things to say for Private Ryan that aren't accurate, but there are things that, really do, when Tom Hanks is on the beach and that one guy's like, sir, what are we going to do? You don't have time for that chain of custody of decision making. You have to be able to react and get moving quickly. And if you go in there already like, it's not any big deal, you're already behind. I think you're not going to perform to the level that you should. You'll start letting yourself down, and then that's going to really weigh heavily on you. And you have to wonder why what you're doing.
Well, can I ask you to go a little deeper into that? Because when you talk about that, when people are looking to you, everything has gone to hell around you, and they're looking to you for the answer, and you're the only one that can give it. And if you're right, you're the greatest thing ever. And if you're wrong, you're the biggest piece of shit ever.
I could become a case study in what not to do.
Exactly. So you got to explain the psychology behind, in your own mind. I'm talking about you personally, how you feel, because you can make a great decision or you can make a horrible decision, and you have about 0.005 seconds to make that decision.
Correct. And there's not a lot of time for analysis. It is really, I call it recognitional decision making. You're pulling in a ton of inputs that have to get filtered so fast that you say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And unless it's something completely outlandish, and the trust that I had in my own people, that when I said, look, this is what's going to happen, nobody was like, I'm not doing that. Like, okay, that's sound. But we had worked with each other for quite a while before that. For me personally, I just said, okay, this makes sense to me. And that's one of my strengths, is I'm able to distill all that information like really fast until it just is right. The answer is like right in front of me. Okay, this is what we need to do. And then I'm able to execute it. And I had a guy, guy I worked with who trained us, who was saying, you have enough time to do things right. You do not have any time to screw around. So do it right and take yourself through how you're going to perform, because the mechanics and all the other things are the same. Now, don't get me wrong. You can do a firefight. It's not just the same as like doing a magazine change under fire, that kind of thing. But, the principles kind of apply. They start to overlap. But for me, I was like, all right, I'm committed to this decision, and that's how I'm going to convey it.
Okay, so let's flip that coin on its head then and go to the other side. You got guys that are in the rear, upper, higher in the command that have months to break down that decision when it goes wrong. And we can talk about a lot of different things. Just coming to my mind, you got the Marsoc 7, you got the Marsoc 3, you got people that can spend years breaking that stuff down off a decision that has to be made, like we said, as quickly as possible. How does that make you feel? And how do you talk about like moving forward when knowing, like we talked about, you could be the greatest person ever, or you could be torn apart at a
Uh,
moment's notice?
so in both cases that you're mentioning, I know those people um, quite well. And when we deployed, uh, the Marsoc incident had already occurred. So we were deploying on the heels of that. So that was already it was starting to boil. It wasn't what it became, but there was already a mark against Marsoc. And this is not detracting from those Marines, those men who acted as they did. That's been adjudicated. It is saying that the specter of that incident was hanging over us. So people were indeed looking at us with tighter scrutiny. Um, and I think that there is a idea that we need to act appropriately and not bring certainly Marsoc or our actions into disrepute. But on the other side, I had to look out for my people and my men and react as appropriately. And I wasn't going to freeze up like a mannequin and not be able to execute. I figured we'd sort it out on the other end. We couldn't let that be a limiting factor. And I mean, when I was working in Joint Special Operations Command, uh, particularly when we were doing some very difficult direct action missions. All the missions had tons of sensors and ability to record what was happening on the ground. So you want to talk about being second guessed? People could watch it in real time and be like, well, why is so and so over there? How come this person is doing that? You can only affect what you can affect. Kind of all the way back to what we were talking about. You've got these high level policy decisions that are being made of moving the goalposts in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then you can focus on what you can do at that moment during that deployment. And then when it really gets down into the micro decisions, in that moment that you're in, you have to have full confidence in what you're going to do is right. And then after that, if you hesitate that you don't believe you're doing the right thing, it's over. And I don't. There's no clean answer, but I gotta say that Afghanistan was not a clean war, if there is one.
Does that ever make you feel helpless?
Oh, it can absolutely, make you wonder, abandoned. It can make you feel very lonely. Not at the point of time, but afterwards when, someone's coming around like, hey, we need to investigate this. You're like, well, we didn't do anything. What are you talking about? And then, you have to prove your own innocence, vice justify your actions. If that makes sense. And that becomes
guilty until proven innocent.
Right. And that becomes very, well, and it just has to be credible, right? It doesn't have to be true.
Well, but to be credible, let's go back to what you were saying with all that drone flyovers and all of that kind of stuff. They can watch it in real time. That's credible right there. It doesn't matter
Positively.
what you see. That makes it credible in and of itself.
Positively. And so I've been to plenty of debriefs where they talk about stuff like that on the ground. And, if something more let's call it difficult happens on the ground as a result in a mission, that's going to get dissected. And so, yeah, I think commanders have to be cognizant, but they also have to not only trust in their own decision making, but trust that what they're going to do is going to be backed up. And other than that, they just, it is a moment of reaction. One thing, if you're talking about, premeditation, as happened in Haditha in Iraq, and some of the other really heinous war crimes that have been documented. One thing, you're thinking about doing something, in a deliberate fashion, but something that's happening in the middle of a firefight under, extreme conditions, and you're trying to not only look out for your people, but get them out of a really difficult situation, a dangerous situation. I don't think you're comparing the same things, but we use the same lens to compare it.
Yeah, I agree, but I'll use it from a law enforcement term. Body cameras are everywhere. Plus, everybody has a camera on their person these days. Everybody. and you can get bits and pieces of that camera footage, or however you maybe want to look at it. The problem that I have with it is that I believe that no recorded camera, it can be turned into anything. It can be made to look good or bad. Anything that's recorded could be made to look good or bad. And so I guess I got to ask you, as a commander, you talked about being in those briefings and stuff. How do you keep the integrity of protecting everything around you and still explaining the hard ways to do things? Because let me give you an example. Like when I was talking to Eric from the Marsoc 3, and he says there's a colonel that tells him, if you do good on this in a veiled threat, you won't promote, you won't do anything like that. Marsoc was already looking to get, taken away. The Marsoc 7 had already happened. All of these kind of things. How do you fight for your troops and still keep it above board in those briefings?
That comes down to your personal code for sure. I had pretty clear discussions with my troops ahead of time of things were going out, and they knew what would be expected and wouldn't be expected. I never doing veiled threats of like, if you don't do this could go bad for you. That's just toxic leadership. If I have a fault, I do side on the part of my men almost to a fault. That
And
may
that was the
be,
point that I'm bringing up.
yeah, I may have been taken advantage by that. In fact, I have been taken advantage by others. That's not to disparage anyone on the enlisted side. I'm just saying that has happened to me as a result of the kind of my constitution, if you will. But I stand by my decisions and I stand by the things that I have done because I believe I was doing the right thing at the point in time with the information that I had the uh, based upon the circumstances. And that's the best answer that I could do. And ultimately, I don't ever want to think that I made a decision that was such a way that it put somebody unknowingly or unnecessarily. Well, unknowingly is a little bit different, and I'll caveat that in a minute. But unnecessarily in a bad position, and then have them take the fall. Now, unknowingly, if something happens, and I'm like, "Hey, we need to get to the bottom of this," and it's being obfuscated and being hidden, I can't do much for somebody who's trying to cover that up and hide it. So I want to work with it, even if it's difficult. I mean, that's the mark of good leadership, is to have your people. You're going to back your people, but if it's proven that that trust has been violated, it can't be inviolable. There comes a point where you're just going to have to be like, all right, I have tried what I can do. And then that becomes a matter of perception, which is also a difficult, back and forth, as you well know.
Well, and I think more to that question that I'm talking about is you as a captain over there, and you're having to explain the actions of everything that's going on there. There has to be a little pulling of you want to continue your career. You want to become a major and a colonel and all of those kind of things. And
Mm-hmm.
that can be a very inside fight in yourself of knowing you have to move ahead in your career and going along, getting along.
Well, I think there's a difference between being a careerist and wanting to have a career.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Right. So there are people who will be a careerist or do just whatever they need to do to get ahead. And hopefully they take advantage of everything that is available to them and deflect all the blame from anything that's bad that happens to them, whether their men do it or they do it. And there are people who are like, okay, this is my career. This is what I do. But within this moment, this is the direction I'm going to go. And I stand by my decision making, and, for good or for ill. I don't think I ever had in my mind at the time a decision like, well, this might affect my promotion. Certainly after the fact, when you're talking about things, you realize that it could absolutely, come back to you. I was like, oh, I probably shouldn't pull the trigger. No, I mean, you're doing it. But I think there's a big distinction there, because careerists are much more self-interested, and unfortunately, there's quite a number of them out there, and that's not germane to just the military. You see that in corporate, you see that in any number of different, anything that's got a hierarchical organization. Is there are people who are just like, you know what, I'm going to be a beat cop, and then I'm going to become a detective, and then after that I'm going to get in a vice, and then after that I'm just on and on. They're just going to try and get to where they need to be, whether they're very effective in any of those things. And then there are others who are like, I really like being good at this, and Being a captain in Marsoc, running around in Afghanistan in 2007 and 8 was unlike anything I will ever have done in my life. And if
So,
if you could do that for the rest of your life and the adrenaline and everything else, minus the really horrible things that did happen with the loss of my Marines and people being wounded, um, yeah, but that's not how this is meant to work either. You don't get to stay in those positions the whole time. So I think when it comes down to decision making, you're trying to recognize what you can, and then you're reacting in such a way that you're split second mitigating the risk to the what that decision or the detriment of that decision could lead to.
I think there's a lot of hollow leadership. And I want to ask you, you said it very well. I've never heard someone say that, being a careerist and being career minded. Do you think that we've maybe gone a little overboard and we have more careers than career minded leadership now?
Well, I think that's always been there, but Fred Galvin, who wrote A Few Bad Men, and someone that I knew in Marsoc, he said it in a way that I couldn't capture. He said, we have created a generation of officers who you don't have to do anything right so long as you don't do anything wrong.
Can't get in trouble for not doing anything.
Right. But that's not just isolated to Marsoc. I saw that in the larger picture of the Marine Corps as well. I mean, I retired as a lieutenant colonel, and I worked on brigade level staffs, and I got to see how all kinds of people interacted. I've been in the Pentagon, and I've briefed all kinds of high level officers and stuff like that. And you just, I'm not sure it's fair to say they do this because they're a Marine officer. They do this because they're an Army infantry guy, or they're only out for themselves. That type of sycophancy, that type of self-interest has always existed, and you see it in politics. You see it all over the place. But yes, when it's seen in the military, particularly in areas where you're really having to look out for people around you. For me, I was very lucky. As we were coming up in Marsoc, that we empowered our enlisted leaders to make decisions on behalf of the organization, recognizing that yes, it was me who was responsible for everything my unit did or didn't do. But because of that level of trust, they did what they were supposed to for the most part. And it wasn't always roses, but I was very, very confident, or at least I felt good about empowering my people to do the things they could. And when you're getting into distributed operations, which was later was me as a company commander, you had to have a high level of trust to let people execute what you intended, commander's intent. And yeah, I mean, leadership is tough to define. And like you said, you do it right, you're great. There are plenty of people, I'm sure, who will debate the things that I have done in my career, and maybe even this podcast as to what I'm saying. But it's I know that in my time, as a leader, that I try to be circumspect in the way that I approach those decisions, and not let my own personal thoughts of advancement get in the way of that.
Being a commander to you is more than just a job. I really feel that, in knowing you and the talks that we've had and stuff. It's more than just a job. It is being kind of the leader of that family that you have, very small family or whatever, but you are a leader to those people. What do you think the hardest day that you ever had to shoulder as a leader in Afghanistan was?
The first combat death, when Luke Milam was killed, that absolutely was one of the hardest things to deal with, because we were in the middle of a mission that still had to continue, and I still had to be focused on leading my troops, along with the other people around us. And I still talk to Luke's family. I'm in good communications with them, and just thinking about not only my job as a leader out there, but what was I going to say to them? How was I going to talk about it? And then you're just trying to reconcile the fact that it's over. And as I said, on the one patrol I was doing, where I did where the Marine was killed, after going over the mine. Uh, as tragic as that was, and I don't mean to discount anything, I didn't know him. He was a human being, and he was serving and had done, certainly his duty is, to go out that night with us. But Luke was he was a sailor, but he was my doc, and he had been in the unit for ages, and he had an already exemplary combat experience or record, and he was very experienced. And so when that happened, it was just sort of like we lost one of our heroes. And for me as a leader, it was devastating.
Can we talk about what happened that day?
Yeah, we were in a pretty protracted firefight on a couple of fronts, and one of the vehicles they were with was up on they'd set up a fighting position kind of up on this ridgeline, not like they were up on this ridgeline, but just kind of behind the military crest and engaging as another unit was maneuvering. And one of the vehicles got hit with machine gun fire, wounding a couple people, and Luke helped stabilize and patch them up with another medic, and then got back into his vehicle to fire with a machine gun from the back of it. And that vehicle was hit by a rocket and went into the troop compartment and killed him pretty much instantly. And it wounded the gunner. It wounded 5 other people as well, and just absolutely, took the vehicle out. And yeah, that just changed the momentum of everything. And I was actually not physically there at the position. I was at another position, and I heard it over the radio. His call sign come over the radio, and I was like, oh my God. And I had a list of, they call it kill numbers, of the call signs. I had that laminated in a notebook that I'd carry around just so I could, reference them as appropriate. And I had to confirm it. I looked down, and not that not that having a Marine or anyone else would not have been any less tragic, but in this case, I just was just stunned, and I read it and looked, and I said, yeah, okay, this is bad. And then we had to, other people heard it over the radio as well, had to inform the unit, and we still had this mission to continue. So there was none of this like, okay, we're going to stop everything, time out, let's get everybody cleaned up, then we'll reset, and then we can go back to engage the enemy. We had to continue with this fight and this very chaotic situation. And I say this, I think I learned to lead that day for sure. At a very, very sobering, and to this day, very tough thing to dealt with.
So what was different about your leadership that day?
I had to supplant my personal feelings. I think I'm probably personable as a leader. I won't say I became wooden or anything, but I had to become a little more detached from the situation in order to get through it, if that makes sense. Like not wooden, but just I had to be able to say, okay, I am now I have to focus on this entire mission for the people that I have around me who are still alive and moving forward, with what's now required of us. And I'm going to have to compartmentalize or figure out how to not dwell on this until there's an appropriate time. It doesn't mean it goes away. It just means that you have to find a way to supplant it just for a bit. And I never had to experience that before. I'd never really thought of it. And when people talked about combat casualties and, training and being able to carry on your mission afterward, that was all just academic. I really had not known anyone who'd ever done that prior to that one incident, with the mine. And now it had happened to me directly. And that had all happened within the space of a couple of weeks. So not only is all my leadership training being tested, but now I have to not only put it into action, but figure out the adjustments I'm going to make in a way that I have not gotten any coaching on. I've not seen anything like that before.
Do you think you lose sight, because we talked earlier about where you can't think that your enemy is inhuman because you might do things and stuff like that? Do you think at any point in that battle, when you lose someone so close to you, that there's a real hatred that comes out in you in that fight to continue on with it? Yeah, you're compartmentalizing it, but it's different for you. The stakes are different now.
I don't believe it's hatred, because that is just such a powerful emotion that you're actually going to be blinded by. But there's fury. You're very angry, and you want some sense of uh, revenge or comeuppance. I think what it comes down to is that you want to be able to release those emotions. Like, you want to be able to get rid of all of that and feel like you're vindicated in doing so. And you want to take it out on somebody, and not like in a war crimes way, but you want to be able to just channelize that. And that's a hard thing to do, because you have to keep that under control as well. Those emotions can get ahead of you, and then you're not in control. And you, you have to mean, God, it's really hard in those kinds of situations, in war, to maintain your humanity. And um, that becomes at odds with, like you're talking about, that feel for revenge and wanting to get after it. And we did fight with some ferocity well after that. Like, no doubt that we, against combatants, armed combatants, we were like, we're fighting. And if you guys think we're going to let up on you, you're out of your minds. That doesn't mean somebody's trying to surrender and we do something awful. It's a matter of just like, hey, this is the enemy, and we're going to fight them as hard as we can on behalf of our fallen comrade. And the fact that, you got to unleash that fury. And I think it just became, it could become consuming, but I think it was just something that really became a coal that burned inside of all of us.
But I want to, you talk about you want to get comeuppance and things like that. I want to go to your book 22 for a second.
Okay.
And I want to kind of do a parallel to it. When it's all said and done and the fight's over, there's no closure.
Kind of like an allegory for Afghanistan, is it not?
I mean,
and I don't know if I wrote it. I don't know if I wrote it that way. I'd love to tell you that I had that kind of foresight. But yeah, I think that's another thing, is that it just kind of ends. It has its energy and it just dissipates, and then you're very, maybe there's this letdown of adrenaline. And I don't mean like like the adrenaline's coming down, like all of a sudden you're just exhausted and you don't feel accomplished. Other times after you get done with a firefight, your adrenaline's pumping so hard and you're like, oh wow, that was crazy. And you're all kind of laughing with each other. But again, all of this seems very surreal. I've used that word before, but how else could you compare that? And that's one of the things that, I haven't seen every war movie out there, but a lot of them just get really wrong on this. Is just how these things, combat situations really unfold and then end. And it may not be as dramatically saleable, because it's not as cool as it looks in the movies in some capacities.
but how frustrating is that there's no closure? You don't reach anything at the end of it. Yes, it's over. Yes, you did what you had to do, but there's no solution at the end. Would you agree with that?
Right. Well, that really gets down to an idea of futility. And I think that started to weigh on me as I went through my career and I got in the ranks, and just looking at the imbalance between what we were doing and our national policy, that this all seemed to be or an experiment in futility. And it was very frustrating. But that goes back to what you asked for, what's the legacy on this? We have to keep the memory of these people who sacrificed, alive. We have to perpetuate the fact that what they were doing was, service was at least noble, if the cause itself was not necessarily great. And I'm not diminishing anyone's service in the GWAP because of it, but there was stuff outside of anyone's control that they couldn't affect. So going forward and doing what others would not, and putting themselves in situations that eventually could lead to people being wounded or killed, that's a supreme sacrifice. That's a supreme debt that people owe those who went and did it. And that's what I believe is a legacy. So on the other side, yeah, closure is not gonna, and if you felt like you were complete or that it was closed out, what would that look like? And I don't know. I guess I'm asking that rhetorically to myself as you say it, but yeah, I mean that's a pretty. We've talked about some pretty deep stuff so far. I'm impressed. I thought I was going to come on here for a quick book tour. We just we chat about, but this is great. This is great.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I ask these questions is because your book, 22, is absolutely amazing. For as short as it is, it
Thank you.
packs a huge punch in it. And we'll get into that a little more. But when you say that, it brings up another question to me though. When you feel as a commander, when you get up to major, lieutenant colonel, and you feel that it's futile what you're doing, there's futility in the stuff that you're doing. How do you go to the guys under your command when you yourself feel it's futile and still spread that good word to them?
Well, it's not lying, and the troops know the difference. Like they're going to know if you're bullshitting them, and so there's a bunch of ways I guess you can present it, but you can even say, "Hey, this sucks, but we got to go do it." Um, you know, that's honest and straightforward, and people can't get out of it. But if it comes to a point that a leader feels so strongly that they can't continue with that mission anymore, it does the troops a disservice to lead them in a lie. And if they feel that strongly, they should resign and move on. And I never felt that strongly. I just was like, this is very frustrating. And but at the other side, I had people I needed to lead, and I needed to do the job to the best of my ability. And yes, there may have been some juxtaposition in that, in my own personal feelings, but when it came time for me to say, hey, look, we're going to go do this, I didn't get into any big, confessional or debate about it.
So, kind of one last question about your command. How did it feel to be responsible in situations where no decision was ever really clean? It was only necessary.
I believe that those decisions are the ones you will probably evaluate the most. Those are the ones that you kind of will look back on and say, the second guessing occurs, and it happens in everything. But in this case, in these cases, you have to give yourself a little bit of grace that you were making the right decision within the context or within the environment in which you were making them. And you did as I said, my Vietnam buddy said, you did the best that you could. Otherwise you will always feel like you could have, like you'll hold yourself hostage to what you wish you had done. And in some cases that, I don't know. I don't think that's very healthy, but in some cases it's certainly justified because you lost somebody, or if I had done this, it wouldn't have changed. But I don't know. I don't think that's as bad as premeditating bringing down the world economy because of bad financial decisions. That's a criminal.
Is there any of those decisions that you still think about?
Uh, well, I think about Luke. I mean, I was there the day that it happened. Could I have affected anything? Would I have been on the ground? I mean, there was another mission I was working later in my career. We were working with some Rangers, and I came up with the operational plan. I put them into harm's way out of necessity because of the situation on the ground. There was an American unit that was in really bad shape in a part of eastern Afghanistan, and we put the Rangers in to help alleviate that so they could get quite a number of combat wounded off the battlefield. And it was me that made that developed the plan. It was me that made the decision to push it to my commander, and one Ranger was killed and 3 were wounded as a result. Now, I was not on the ground with them. Did I put them in that situation that they got into that led to those casualties? Indirectly, I said yes, because it was me that worked with their own commander to develop the plan, and then he, once around the battlefield, they had to execute it as they knew how. But I carry that with me. It isn't as if I could have said go left instead. I wasn't directing squad level tactics, but it was the overall plan itself that led to those casualties, um, that I carry with me. Because I went forward and I said, "Sir, this is what they've come up with. This is how they'd like to do it, and I think it's sound." And he said, "Okay, go." Now that wasn't me putting my body armor on and leading them, but I very much came up with the help them get that approved. And when it results in that kind of stuff, it's really, and no one came to me like, "This is your fault." It's just something I carry with me because of you're involved in that. You're in such a way that I feel there's ownership that people have to take, and you can't just be like, "Meh, stuff happens." That's just completely inhumane.
I got to ask you, let's get into your writing a little bit, because all of these answers bring up the character in 22 so much to me. And the answer that you just gave there, the character in that book has the same thoughts. Could they have done something different when two Marines die on a mission that's in the book? Could he have done something different? I want to know how much, because I know these books are not, nonfiction. They're not a true story. They're maybe based on things, but how much of you is those character?
Um, well, the voice of the author, right, is going to come through in the writing. So certainly there are tenors of the way that I express myself in person, and that translates onto the page. Yes, there are things in all of my books that either I experienced or others experienced. I will say that with 22 in particular, that character is based upon someone I knew who was indeed an explosive ordnance disposal technician, and he told me some of the stories that I used inside, or at least based some of these things inside of the book on. But that is not it's not a biography of him, as far as how he relates to his family and those pieces, and it's not an autobiography for me as far as all the things that I'm hiding. I took quite a number of different approaches to the book, in particular because it addresses veteran suicide. I talked to 5 different veterans who either attempted and did not follow through, or did not succeed, or thought about doing so and didn't follow through, to kind of get an understanding of their mindset of why that things became so bad that they would take their own lives. And this is me going back to you're asking me. I got my own dark times around, and I'll just say up front, I have not considered taking my life, and I have not attempted it, nor do I intend to. But I tried to get myself in a mindset, or in their mindset, behind, what's leading to this, what's causing that, what gets the person in such a dark space. And I know this happens in the law enforcement community. I know this happens in high stress uh, careers, professions. But I wanted to kind of convey that. And so a lot of the things that are happening in that book are a distillation of those interviews I did with those people. Never mind, my friend who was, the primary basis for at least the protagonist. And then as you take all of that together, then of course I have my own thoughts and my own ideas and my own things that I need to unload, and that the writing becomes a vehicle to help translate that. And so, yeah, I think there's a blend, and I think it's an effective blend of my perspective, that of the people I interviewed and know, and then the the actual act of attempting that I'm not particularly familiar with, except that I know plenty of people who've killed themselves, and I don't like it. I'd like to try and address that and alleviate that in some capacity. And on my own personal website, I've got plenty of veterans organizations that address those things in particular, or at least the idea of veteran suicide in particular. But it's a huge issue, and I I think that 22, that's what the reason I wrote the book was. I felt it needed to be an important expression of what a lot of people are going through and maybe are too afraid to talk about.
I gotta explain to you when I read it. When we're going through the setup for the suicide in the book, and I don't want to give too much away from it, but it's absolutely haunting to read it. And I don't know how you tapped into that emotion so much that he just carries on with his life, goes for a run, comes back home, gets a bottle of whiskey. There's so much setup to it, but it's haunting to read it. Just the normalcy and the it just makes it sound like it's just another day to him. That this is not a momentous occasion, and that was absolutely chilling reading the book.
Well, on one level, I really appreciate that. On another, that was one of the things I talked to one of the people. Like there are some who just get into a really dark space and they're brooding all the time, and they keep looking at the pistol or they keep looking at the pills, and they just like I just can't do this anymore. But then I looked at a couple of people who actually did kill themselves that I knew, and literally 12 hours before it happened, they were at a family dinner or they'd been out with friends. Or if you look at the lead singer for Soundgarden, Chris Cornell, apparently he was playing with his daughter and having a normal day, and then he was dead. And so I think I did want to bring it out that this stuff is not immediately seen, where someone is just like, I feel so bad that I'm going to do this, and they express that. They're holding on to normalcy in a lot of ways, as counterintuitive as that sounds, to then just say, well, if I've only got one day left and I'm in charge of that day, I'm going to do the things I like to do, or like just make it just another day, and then I'll follow through with this plan and it'll be over. And for me, as I was setting it up, it was like, what a juxtaposition. Like how do you do that? And I don't know, right? I haven't gone through that, but of the people I talk to and of the suppositions that I infer from those who have, it's none of it seems to make sense, DJ, right?
So, you're right that it is hidden normalcy, and other things like that. So, how do we combat something that is so hidden in the shadows so many of the times?
Well, I think as ironic as it's going to sound, because we're doing a podcast that people are going to see online and listen to on their phones, our modern age has lost the ability for a lot, or is losing the ability to have a lot of human connection. And there's a lot of loneliness in the world. There's a lot of isolation. This isn't to say that people haven't, killed themselves for decades as a result of traumatic stress. I'm not going to call it just traumatic stress as related to war. All kinds of things affect that, or feelings of just impossible odds. But we need to encourage each other to talk to each other. It's worth, meeting someone for a drink or whatever, for coffee, and feeling that it's okay to say, I don't feel very good. And you see these advertisements for online therapists, and, but everybody's supposed to be perfect. And as you look at Instagram or anything else, you get these very curated snapshots of people's lives. And we need to have a little more authenticity in our interactions. And it's okay to disagree, but I think one of the pieces that veterans in particular are struggling with is they want to be seen, and they want to be acknowledged, and they want to be told that, don't worry about it. They want to be told it's okay for you to feel the way you feel. And I may not understand that in particular, but I care that it matters to you, instead of, oh, you were in Iraq? That's cool. Kill anybody? Awesome. No, but I did see a car full of people on fire. Have you seen that? Like, what kind of conversation, ultimately be more like, oh, really? Gosh, I didn't know you're feeling that way. What's going on? Well, I did some stuff in the service, and it haunts me. And job's not going particularly well. Just broke up with my girlfriend. Yeah, I just don't know what to do. And so being able to have these involved conversations and feel that there's empathy and direct um, connection would go a long way. My opinion would go a long way. And I don't know if we're doing that as much.
So to go all the way back at the beginning of our conversation, do you think part of this is because that victory parade never happened?
Maybe, but I don't. I really don't know. I mean, we put those parades together for self congratulation, and let's remember that they just had one back in June that kind of was lackluster. Uh, I don't know if a parade is necessarily acknowledged as more of a like. I wouldn't mind seeing somebody say, you know what, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing, and we're sorry for that, but thank you for going out and doing your best. And it's more than just a free meal on Veterans Day at Golden Corral.
Do you think something like that will ever happen?
No, I think we've gotten way past uh, that period of acknowledgement, and it's kind of up to. That's why I'm fairly vocal about it. It's up to us as veterans to, I would say, advocate for veterans requirements. And slashing the VA and saying we care about you out of the same side of your mouth is garbage. And everything we have in this country is on the backs of veterans. It really is. Because we're the ones that keep this shit moving. And that's not to say that people inside of the country aren't working hard and doing well, but that it provides that layer of security so that things can be can perpetuate, and especially over the last 20 years. And then now it's like, well, we had the best of intentions. We just, we didn't mean for any of this to happen. But gosh darn, I'm really sorry, it did. But no one's going to be like, dang, man, you know what? We really just didn't know what was going on, and we didn't have a plan. And who's going to admit that, BJ? Who's ever going to, come forward and go, wow, I didn't know, and it's on me. 5 presidential administrations.
Well, I would actually take the opposite side of that whenever someone would say that it was, that they messed up, that they didn't know what they were doing. They're sorry that that happened. I think we go to the other direction with it, and people say, just like they say to law enforcement and stuff, you signed up for it. You knew what you were doing. You're the one that said that they would do that. And they put the onus back on the person.
That's right. But if I'm going to the VA, don't complain to me that my VA benefits are too onerous on the taxpayer. That recruiting office was open all the time. So you're right. I did know what I was getting into. And yes, I did sign up for it. And yes, I did do that thing. And I did it willfully. And I'm proud of my service, even if I am frustrated with the way that it has, things unfolded and what became. And it's not like an after the fact of like, boy, I was such a sucker. It's just that you're involved in the moment, and this is what you see at that time. And afterwards, you get an opportunity to come back, as we were talking about, that reflection, hindsight being 2020, of just where it all it was. And yes, there's a bit of frustration, but I write about this, shameless plug, but I write this on my Substack blog, ivanfingram.substack.com. And I have weekly things that, sometimes are reflections on leadership, sometimes are reflections on my observations. And it's not just me poking holes in the American political establishment, even though it's easy to pick on. But there are times when I'm just really frustrated as I sit down to write. And one of the things about being a writer is that you got to practice, and some stuff it can't all just be it can't all be fiction. You've got to be able to express the things that's really inside you, and redirect some of that energy sometimes. But I don't think they're, like you were talking about with closure. I don't think you're going to get that. I think we have to acknowledge that we are in a difficult space. in relations, and it's up to the veteran to help the civilian understand, and it's up to the civilian to actually want to just have a conversation and try to. And I just don't know how to get there. And then it goes all the way back to what I was saying with 22, is that people just feel like they're not being seen, they're not being heard, they feel very ashamed, they're very confused, um, they feel unacknowledged, and then they feel that they don't have any self-worth, which is extremely sad.
I couldn't agree more with you, but I think you're right. I think we're past that point of where there will ever be. I think now we're more into a damage control area where we're just
Mm-hmm.
trying to kind of sweep it under the rug and clean it up and kind of put a nice polish on it and say, well, look, we're helping out and we're,
It
our
happens to other
VA.
people. It happens to other people.
100%.
That's someone else's problem. Yeah,
Yeah. I completely agree. I do want to talk though about your writing. Like you just said, when you write about the politics and you write about the government, you've taken a little flack for your writing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how frustrating can that be though? You've been at the forefront of that. You've been on the ground level of what you're talking about. You've seen it in action, yet you're taking flack from people that think you shouldn't write this, you shouldn't say this, you should just toe the line.
Right. Well, you're in the military that's a fairly conservative environment that is not castigating conservatives. But there's an idea that if you look at the military as kind of a corporation, you're just kind of working inside of that corporate structure. And good workers just do what they're told and keep rolling. And hey, don't worry about it. The check will clear. Um, as I said, I believe in democracy. The big D, it's particularly the Constitution, your First Amendment rights for freedom of expression, your freedom of to be able to write things and say stuff. That's one of our most important things. And having defended all of the parts of the Constitution so that people can live as effectively in this country as we can. We can't just say this is good for me, but it's not for them, or this is okay. We've lost the ability to disagree without being disagreeable, and because that discourse has fallen away in a lot of ways, we create camps of this is what I like and I know what I hate, and so therefore I don't worry about what I like. I'm only against what I hate, and I lose all kinds of subscribers on my Substack, and I have people reach out to me, and I've been called a woke apologist because of the book I wrote with Athena, which is about females involved in Marine Special Operations, in particular the cultural support teams, female apologists as well. Yeah, I've had a lot of people say they don't, I thought you were cool. Well, how can you say stuff like that anymore? You used to be better than this. Well, I guess I've just evolved a little bit. Like I said, you have this moment where you get your head down and you're doing the job, and when you get out, you start looking around, going, "Wait a second, was I missing something here?" And it matters to me. It doesn't have to matter to everybody else, but I appreciate the people that follow me, and I appreciate the people that like what I do, and I like what I write better than the stuff some people don't. So,
but it's got to piss you off because you have earned the right. If anybody has earned the right, you've earned the right to write the stuff that you talk about.
Yes. Oh, well, I won't say that it isn't frustrating, but I can't dwell on it because you're not going to change most of these people I haven't met. Some of them are my friends. Some of them are, or were friends, or just like, unfortunately may have had a parting or falling out. But you can't change people's opinion necessarily, especially if they're going to reach out with vitriol. It's not like, hey, I disagree with you, I'd like to hear more. It's more of like, I don't like you, and this is why, and you need to listen to me. Well, all right, well, but you still read the article, so thanks. But I
no press is bad press.
I'm not adverse to that. I mean, I would prefer good press. And when people you don't have to worry about that. Who cares what people think you're writing? Actually, I do care what people think of my writing, and I do want them to like it, and I do want to find it engaging and stuff. And honestly, I want it to be thought provoking. Yes, as a writer, you become an entertainer in some capacity, and you also it's unavoidable to put your ego out there. I like to think that I'm fairly balanced in that. There are other people who are like, dude, he is not. But you never know how things are going to be perceived. So you kind of have to write for the audience of you, and then it develops from there. But yeah, I agree with you. I've earned the right, but I've also defended the right for other people to be able to write what they do, and perhaps come at me if they disagree. And isn't that the beauty of this? Isn't that what this was supposed to be about?
Yeah,
I
Rick
hope anyway.
Rubin. I don't know if you know who Rick Rubin is, but he was a big producer in music, and there you go. He says in that book there.
I keep it right by my side to give me a little inspiration each day. Yes.
In that book, he says you make things for yourself, and if you make it for yourself and you like it, other people will like it because you stay true to yourself doing it.
And he also writes. It's funny you brought that up because I was literally just going to say, Rick Rubin, the record producer, also writes that once the art is released, it is out of the artist's control as to how it's perceived and received. And he writes in that also that can affect people's egos because they're absolutely expecting a huge land, or if they've had a huge success, the follow up, someone's like, it's not as good as their first album, kind of thing. And so then he's the counselor to the artist, going, hey man, we did this, we took the risks, you stay true to who you are, be proud of your work, be proud of what you've done. Other than that, what are you going to do? And meanwhile, the artist is probably still, crying and wants to break his guitar or whatever. But, but I get it. You launch a book and you have 15 reviews and you write some stuff and somebody says you're a dick and you're just like, what do you gotta, I keep doing this because I love it, DJ.
I feel the same way.
I don't love the critiques, bad critiques, but who does?
I feel the same way about this show. I think these stories need to get out there, and that's why I do it. Is because I think that it's important that we have this discussion out there because I don't think it's around anymore. I don't think deep discussions happen anymore.
Yeah, I mean, think about that, and people can rhetorically we can say that right now. Think about the last really deep chat you had with somebody about whatever. Poetry, existentialism, a movie you liked, politics, something that mattered. Not scrolling on TikTok or your screen or whatever. Like, when's the last substantive engagement you had about a film, a film you watched that moved you, that you thought was really interesting, a book that just you can't not revisit? I mean, that's what this is really about. The whole context of the conflict was having the ability to have a society in which we can have those discussions and produce art and stand up for beliefs and do so uninhibited.
Yeah,
but I don't want to take a deep dive into the politics, but that has gotten corrupted over the years. Not just in the immediacy, but over the years that's gotten corrupted.
And I think lines have been blurred. Definitely. I don't think there is. I don't think anyone. I don't know if I can say anyone takes those offices with true intentions, or they might take them with true intentions, but their ideals change very much to keep them popular, to keep them in the face of everyone.
Once you're in, you want to stay in,
right?
And that will change your perspective, I believe.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So let's talk about where people can find your books, where they can read them, because the ones I've read so far, I own 2 of them. I've read 1 of them so far. They're absolutely fantastic. Let's talk about where they can find them.
My latest novel is called Once We Pledge Forever. It is published by the Sager Group. All of my books are available on Amazon. I have an Amazon authors page. I have 5 books out, but Once We Pledge Forever was a long project. Took me a decade to really get published, to get the manuscript and everything in a position that it just really works the way that I wanted it to. I love working with the Sager Group because they let me maintain complete creative control, which was great for me as a writer. But the other part of it is that the book is not just a bang bang shoot 'em up action novel, although there's plenty of action in there. It's a book about relationships. It's a book about reconciliation. It's a book about reflection, and in many ways, I hope to have written it as such a way that you can examine things within your own lives that will help you perhaps find an ability to heal. So, but yeah, I'm on Amazon. Um, Certainly, you can look the stuff through the Sager Group. Trying to work on some distribution a little bit larger than what I have. I wish I could tell you I've got a gigantic book tour planned. We're working, some visits here and there, but people can reach out to me directly, particularly if they want me to, expand upon things, chat with them, chat with their organizations. You need not be a veteran. But yeah, I've been, that's my biggest production, right? Or the biggest piece that I produced right now. Not sure which more to grab. Amazon is the spot. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. Please reach out.
Can you give those handles for Instagram and for Facebook?
Instagram is at IFI_writer. And on Facebook, you can just find me as Ivan F. Ingram Writer.
And then you also have a website, correct?
I do. IvanFingram.com. Not particularly original, but it gets the job done.
Well, if they're looking for you, that's very specific. So
I never thought I'd say this, but you can Google me.
Yeah. I think pretty much you can Google anybody now.
Well, right. But I mean, for a while, someone was like, hey, man, I found this article that you wrote. I Googled it or Googled your name and that's what popped up. And I was like, well, what else is there? So I wrote it in myself. I Googled it and I was like, oh boy, well, I guess there's no avoiding it. I can't, I need to make a commitment to this side.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm so glad that we got to get this done because we were going to have to push it way out. And I'm glad that I got the honor of reading the book, and it was absolutely fantastic. I can't give you enough praise about it. It was really, really good. And I told you there's scenes in it that are just absolutely chilling. So guys, you need to check it out. 22. Guys, you know where you can find Ivan. Let's talk about where you can find me. You can find me on Instagram, as always, at the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast. And you can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations, they're in video form, at the DTD podcast, Dynamic Tales Delivered. Make sure you share, like, subscribe, be a friend, tell a friend, all of those things. We're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we're on our way to doing it. So make sure you hit that button and tell your friends about it. Lastly, let's talk about the guys that make this happen. As always, my buddy Hoot over at Nomadic Research, nomadicresearch.com. They are the ones that will get it done. If you want to look cool in t-shirts, hats, hoodies, backpacks, carry-ons, anything that you could possibly want to just look cooler in the airport, in the urban environment, or in the combat zone, they can take care of it. Nomadicresearch.com. Make sure you get a hold of those guys and check them out. I told you I just took their bag on vacation. It was absolutely fantastic. So make sure you check them out. Nomadicresearch.com. Guys, that's going to be it for this week. That's Ivan. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you on the next one. See you later.